Welcome to the Innovation Race podcast, where we meet fascinating inventors, innovators, politicians, and leaders who share the view that what's best for our country is to protect patents and keep innovation in America. Now, here's your host, Jenny Beth Martin.
Adam Mossoff is a law school professor at the Antonin Scalia School of Law at George Mason University. I learned so much from the interview with Adam Mossoff, and he was so generous with his time that we broke this interview into 2 episodes. Here's part 2 of the interview with Adam Mossoff. Okay, so we talked about injunctive relief and we talked about PTAB, but you were talking about some of the other problems in the America Invents Act.
Yeah, so another one, the American Invents Act did 2 things primarily. One was that it created the PTAB,
right?
Which is massive radical change for our patent system. In fact, there are now more PTAB petitions filed than there are lawsuits filed in regular courts, what lawyers refer to as Article 3 courts, because it's under Article 3 of the Constitution. What we now tell our students is you actually have to become an expert in PTAB practice because you can't escape it. This is the new litigation space for patents. Which, by the way, it's not even litigation. It's a tax on patents.
Right.
And then the other big change that the American Invents Act did was it shifted us from what we call a first to invent to a first to file. So the United States was unique in the entire world because our Constitution in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8 authorizes Congress to enact patent laws and to secure to the inventor an exclusive right in their discovery.
Right.
That's the language that's used. And the first Congress said that means first inventor. That means the person who actually created it, the actual inventor. By the way, England was not a first to invent system. Because England at that time viewed patents as privileges granted by the crown, and it was solely an economic regulatory benefit. You know, this advances the crown's economic policies, and so we're going to give you this special privilege grant for a little while because we deem it to be in the interest of the crown to do so. The United States said, no, this is just like with the farmer who tills the soil and creates the crops. The inventor creates something, that inventor has a right to it. And that Lockean sense of John Locke, you mix your labor with something. And we were unique in this approach. In fact, the rest of the world has approached patents from this perspective of England did originally as a first-to-file system. This is a matter of economic regulatory policy. This is a matter of just the government making policy decisions as to what it's in its interest in granting these special privileges.
Right.
And the United States was unique in this. And under this argument that we have to, quote, harmonize, unquote, our laws with the rest of the world, this was our justification.
Wow.
We threw out our first to invent system and adopted a first to file system in the American Invents Act as well.
Ignoring the things that make America exceptional.
And make America exceptional. This is what it meant to have the Wright brothers and Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla, who, by the way, emigrated to this country to invent and to get patents, and Charles Goodyear, who was the first inventor of the process that makes rubber as we now know it as a usable product. By the way, who lost his patent in England because a person stole his idea and filed first in England.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
okay.
and we knew that. This was reported on in the United States about how, look at this horrible thing. He was denied his legitimate patent in England. He is the true first inventor of this process, of this incredible thing that has made possible our industrial revolution. So we understood what this important difference was between first to invent versus first to file. This is the difference between having a property right system and having an administrative regulatory system and a privilege. And we shifted more towards the privilege administrative system, which is part and parcel of adopting the PTAB as well.
You have to fight for the inventor. And it is the inventor. It's not the person who watches them do it and then writes it all down and goes to file it. That's not actually inventing. It's stealing. What other things do you think it is important for people to understand about patents and the law about it? And have you thought about it the way that we show in the film, how America, because of I actually know you have because you have brought this up to Congress, and I watched a hearing where you did it, where you're saying we have to be careful because we're weakening America, and China is giving the appearance that they are strengthening their patent protection. What did you think about that part of the film? And as a law professor, what do you think of it?
The Innovation Race documentary is a fantastic documentary. I mean, because it takes what can be seemingly complex issues, or at least issues that are made unnecessarily complex by the people who want them to be complex, because then they can get away with shenanigans like stacking panels.
Right.
And by the way, that word shenanigans is actually used by courts now to refer to what's been happening at the PTAB.
Okay.
But they at the same time say, it's not our job as courts in our current system to interfere, in the same way that they don't interfere in other agencies as well when other agencies engage in the same shenanigans. Shows you how far we've fallen,
right.
In some respects. And, it's one thing for us to weaken our own patent system, right? I mean, that's bad enough by itself, right? That we're undermining the very system that made possible the Wright brothers, Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla, Farnsworth, the inventor of television, Shocklaw, the inventor of the laser, all Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, the inventor of the personal computer, the Apple II. They got a patent on the Apple II computer. My first computer was an IBM Model 2 PS2 Model 30. Yeah, back in 1984.
Right.
I with the one of the first computers made with the 3.5 inch.
Oh yeah, I remember, rather than the bigger one. Yeah.
With the real 5 1/4 floppy.
Right. Right.
Yeah, those were you thought, wow, this is an incredible system, and I mean those things now. That's like That's like looking at the Flintstones.
It really is. It truly is.
It's fun to chat with a fellow techie. But it's bad enough for us to be undermining that system, the system that made possible all these great innovators that we learn about, that we watched. There's an entire episode of Schoolhouse Rock called Mother Necessity, which is about all the great inventors: Samuel Morse, Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, all of these great patent owners. They don't mention the patents in that episode of Schoolhouse Rocks, but they're all patented inventions. It's one thing we'd be doing that, but we live in a global economy. We live in a world with other countries who have advanced economies, like in Western Europe, in Germany, in England. And more specifically, we live in a world of global competitors. Historically and traditionally, we've faced military competitors. We had the war with the Nazis. We had the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Where we won those wars through technology, through innovating.
Right.
We didn't beat the Soviets by having more tanks and more planes and more bombs. We couldn't outnumber them. We beat them because we had better planes, better tanks, better technology. And now we are in a global competition with China. And it's there's aspects of it that are kind of a traditional Cold War type, but China is for the very first time a more sophisticated competitor than was the Soviet Union. And China recognizes that it's going to win through its geopolitical strategies and dominate the globe, not militarily, but through dominating the technologies and the infrastructure, economic, telecommunications, and otherwise, that other countries will develop and base their economies and their lives on. And so it's very explicit in China. Xi, as you mentioned in your documentary,
right.
He talks about patents in their 5-year plans that we will, focus on and dominate 5G, AI, Internet of Things, self-driving cars. They recognize that if they're building those technologies, they control the people who then use those technologies.
Right.
Their values are then come to define how those technologies are going to be deployed in the world. And those are authoritarian values. Those are not values that are consistent with open, democratic societies that are dedicated to the free market and the protection of the rights of life, liberty, and property, as our founders recognized.
I think that they're giving inventors a false sense of security. That's what I have been saying. And they're luring inventors there to patent in China. And our system is certainly disincentivizing patenting in America. And it's creating an interesting dynamic because there are more people patenting and filing patents in China right now than in America. But I think it's a completely false sense of security because we know they don't respect the rights of the individual. And and if we question that at all, just look at the way that they treated their people during the lockdowns related to COVID.
They're actively running concentration camps. The Uyghurs in Western China.
Their one-child policy.
One-child policy. This is not a country dedicated to the rule of law, the respect of the rights of individuals, and so they've copied our patent system because they see that as a key to developing their own economy and developing the type of technologies that will make it possible for them through their geopolitical strategies to eventually dominate the globe. But as you said, it's not truly our patent system.
No.
It's a patent system that's dedicated to their own domestic industrial policy goals and their geopolitical agenda. And so it only serves those goals. And a great example of this is, so they've started to intercede in some of the global patent lawsuits that are being fought over 5G technologies, which are technologies that are deployed globally. So you have lawsuits all over the world over the patents.
Right.
And so they've started to issue what are called anti-suit injunctions, which is an order from one court in one country saying to a party, you have to stop all litigation in another country. And Samsung, which is a South Korean company, in 2001 filed a secret lawsuit in Wuhan, China, the place where the COVID-19 came from, in Wuhan, in a lawsuit that it had with Ericsson. And Ericsson and Samsung are in a lawsuit in the United States, and there are lawsuits in Europe. Samsung filed a secret lawsuit that Ericsson didn't know about, because they don't follow the rule of law. They don't notice people give notification of lawsuits. Then Samsung asked for an anti-suit injunction without any notice to Ericsson to shut down its U.S. lawsuit.
Wow.
And they held a hearing. Ericsson didn't know about this. They weren't
because
told.
They didn't even know the hearing was happening.
It's all in secret. And the Wuhan court issues, by the way, on Christmas Day, our Christmas, China doesn't celebrate Christmas, but they know we do.
Right.
So on Christmas Day, they issue the order to Ericsson to shut down its U.S. litigation in Texas that was occurring in Texas. I participated in this as a law professor. I felt was called an amicus brief, which is a fancy Latin for friend of the court brief. So I'm not a party, but I want to help the court understand some of the issues and I wanted to really highlight for the judge and identify for the judge these broader rule of law and lack of due process problems, and how the reason why China is doing this is because it's a fight over Ericsson's licensing of its technologies, its patented technologies on 5G. And Ericsson doesn't make phones, it just licenses its technology. It receives what we call royalties. That's the payment for the use of its property. And China wants to make sure that those royalties are low because Huawei and Xiaomi and HTC make a lot of phones, as you guys talked about in the documentary, and they pay royalties for those phones. And so they want to depress those royalties. So they want their courts to be saying, these are the low royalties that everyone's going to pay. And so that's why they want
to set the prices.
And so we'll ignore rule of law, we'll ignore due process. I mean, basics. I mean, like being told you're being sued.
Right. There's a hearing. You need to be present
for that affects your rights.
Right.
They don't think twice about ignoring that because it serves their own domestic industrial policy goals of ensuring that their own companies, Huawei, which receives massive subsidies from the Communist Party of China already, pays less money in the royalties that it has to pay to Ericsson and ultimately Qualcomm, the American company that has invented 5G, and a few others, InterDigital and Nokia, which are the primary patent owners on these technologies, the primary creators of it.
In that particular suit, did Ericsson listen and stop their case in Texas, or did they continue pursuing that?
So this is how I got involved, because Ericsson then filed a counter lawsuit in its Texas court.
Okay.
And I learned of this lawsuit from a friend, and so I filed an amicus brief in support of their motion for an order. Called now an anti-suit injunction, saying no, the U.S. court is not going to shut down, and we are issuing an order canceling that other order for our country, and unsurprisingly they won, and yet Samsung started the appeal process.
Wow!
It's appealed that decision
in
America. I mean, it was shocking because, I mean, it was so blatant, the violation of due process and rule of law. And during the appeal process, the parties settled. Now, I don't know what the terms of the settlement are because those are secret, but the fact that they were even willing to start the appeal process thinking that they might win that. I mean,
and at some point we have to be smart as Americans and understand that some of these decisions are not just, we're not just talking about patents, and and Ericsson is not even an American company, but we have to protect these things for the sake of all of our businesses, for all Americans. We have to look out for America when we're dealing with, especially when we're dealing with a court in China that is saying that we have to shut down litigation here in America. I don't want us ever to cede that authority to China.
Yeah. And you're right, Ericsson is not an American company, but it has an American headquarters.
Right.
And in fact, its headquarters are in Texas, which is why the lawsuit is in Texas. But we do have an American company, Qualcomm, which is actually the inventor of 5G technology. And it goes to your earlier point about, the fact that you don't see the impact of changes in our patent law, like, the American Invents Act and things of that sort, until decades later. Because especially when it comes to these types of innovations, these foundational platform technologies in drugs and medical treatments and in technology like 5G, you're looking at time horizons of investments and of work and development of these technologies in the decades. 5G took 10 years. So Qualcomm actually invented 5G. The Ericsson and Nokia and InterDigital and other companies kind of contributed technologies to it, but they are the real inventor of it. They started work on that technology over 10 years ago and spent billions to create it.
And we're all going to benefit from it.
And we're all going to benefit it in ways that are unforeseeable and unpredictable. In the same way that, when 4G came around, no one predicted the rise of the sharing economy, which is what was enabled by 4G.
Right.
Airbnb, as you mentioned earlier, and, Uber and all of these incredible services. So who knows what's going to come from 5G, which has an even faster data transmission capacities, even less latency, delay. It's going to make it's really what's making possible the development of self-driving cars, as we're starting to see, and so many other things that will be made possible. That's what's so cool about platform technologies. There was a massive patent war over electricity between Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison. In fact, there were about 800 lawsuits filed in the 1890s over light bulb and related electric technologies in the patent space, because they knew that this was a platform technology. They knew that this was fundamental, that everything was going to be based upon this, and so they understood that the significance of defining, who contributed what, who had which property rights, and what were those property rights. This, we define those through courts. This is how free societies address these issues. We don't have government bureaucrats and officials tell us ahead of time. Well, we used to not. This is what you can do or can't do. People do things, and then when there's a question or a dispute, that's why we have courts. Courts are the mechanism by which you resolve a conflict, and often a conflict between good people who just have a dispute between them. Most people think of courts in the criminal context, but the most important function that courts serve is in the context of resolving contract disputes and settling title deeds and facilitating the market transactions, facilitating people's ability to use their property and to live. And this is why we had these, what were referred to as patent wars, because they were resolving the rights in these kind of new technologies and, defining the boundaries of these title deeds and figuring out who should pay whom and how much.
One thing about Ericsson and Qualcomm and these foundational technologies, you mentioned that that 5G was invented a decade ago, and it took billions in investments to in investing in an investment to create it or to invent it. Well, I'm pretty sure that these companies aren't just sitting around for the next 10 years not inventing, but it seems like, how do you fund something like that if not through the patent system, so that they get the royalties from that investment, so that they can keep coming up with the next whatever it might be.
Exactly.
And I don't know what it's going to be. They, those kind of companies probably do, but they don't. If we can't expect inventors, whether it's a big company or the small guy coming up with a jump rope or whatever it might be, to keep coming up with ideas if they don't get some sort of benefit from it. We are motivated by self-interest, at least to some degree. And some people may say, I have invented this, and the way that I'm going to deal with my patent is to make it available without charging for it. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but they at least get to choose how to do it rather than being compelled to do something with their property.
Right. I mean, and this is what was recognized by the founders, right? I mean, this is when Thomas Jefferson says in the Declaration of Independence, right? We have inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? I mean, that you have the right to have the freedom to pursue the values and the things that you want to create, but you're not going to do that if you're not secured in your rights of liberty, in your rights of person, and more importantly, in your rights of property. And James Madison, who's known as the father of the Constitution, we rely on his notes to understand what the framers were thinking and doing when they wrote the Constitution in 1787. Very famously said of the patent and copyright clause in the Constitution in the Federalist Papers, Federalist Paper number 43, which is the essays that were written to defend the Constitution and explain it during the ratification debates between 1787 and 1790. He said, that this is the utility of this power, this delegation of power to Congress to have patent and copyright. He says, it can't be questioned. He says this is he says explicitly, he said in the context of patents and copyrights, he said this is an area where the interests of the individual and the benefit to the public perfectly coincide.
Wow.
They're perfectly united. And Abraham Lincoln put it beautifully in a very famous speech in 1858, where he referred to the U.S. patent system as providing the fuel of interest to the fire of genius.
Wow.
And by the way, President Lincoln knew of which he spoke, because he remains to this day the only U.S. president to have received a patent.
Oh, and what was his patent on?
So he received a patent in 1848, before he became president, on a method of lifting ships over shoals. So ships that get grounded on sandbars and things of that sort in the Mississippi. No one knows if it was actually deployed or not, but the fact that he invented it, he received a patent on it.
Right.
But he was also very much involved in patent litigation as a lawyer in Illinois. In fact, there's some evidence that he actually funded some of his early political campaigns by when he worked as a patent lawyer for Cyrus McCormick in some of his patent lawsuits. Cyrus McCormick is the inventor of the mechanized reaper. The mechanized reaper is your classic labor-saving devices. This is what replaces the scythe, the hand, the hand reaping of wheat, which is what humans had done for tens of thousands of years. This is what proves Malthus wrong. This is what leads to this explosion in just goods, and food, because it massively increased the efficiency and ability of farmers to harvest crops and quickly and efficiently, and it just and also it had the unintended effect, or at least unpredicted effect, of shifting a lot of people out of agriculture,
right?
Because you didn't need as many farmers now farming, and so then it freed up a labor force for the Industrial Revolution. So because at the time that he invented his mechanized reaper, I think the estimates are that there was something like half the U.S. population was involved in agricultural production.
Wow.
And today it's like less than 0.5%.
Right.
I mean, because this is that's what the Industrial Revolution did. It freed labor. It freed us from the physical drudgery of having to go out and actually by hand with the equivalent of a sword,
Right.
right, cut crops down. Yeah.
And we still have farmers, but they're able to handle acres and acres and acres with just a
mechanized tools.
Right.
Yeah, they're tractors invented by John Deere. John
Right.
Deere invents some of the first great plows that we use and gets patents on them. And Cyrus McCormick didn't, and then he used his patents because they were property rights to create his business. And then on the basis of that business that he created on the basis of his property rights, he invents installment payment plans because farmers didn't have money before they harvested their crops. So
he invented an installment payment plan.
Yes. I mean,
that's all over online shopping now.
I know, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, but again, it just shows you, like, with the things that we don't realize, all of that stuff had to be invented. He also invented customer service because farmers weren't trained in mechanics. And so if their plow broke down, how would they fix it? So he created this idea of a Cyrus McCormick certified mechanic who would go to the farmer's field and repair his mechanized reaper if it broke down. Things that we take for granted now because we think, of course.
Because we're so deeply integrated into everything that we do that we don't even think about where it first came from.
And this is just a great example of kind of all of what economists call dynamic innovation, dynamic economic growth, from how even an individual invention can, not 5G, a mechanized reaper can become a platform for incredible new commercial innovation and new ways in which we benefit and capitalists benefit and business persons benefit and society grows overall. We have a flourishing society.
I think that's truly amazing. And without that, we wouldn't have had the people for the Industrial Revolution because you have to have food before you can. You
have to have food and you have to have a labor force. You have to have people who can work, who aren't in the fields, hand picking cotton and hand cutting down, wheat. Yes, exactly.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really good. We're going to have to get a link to some of things about him that we can include in the description for this, so people can go and look.
I've talked about this in some of my scholarship. Yes, this is one of the fun things that I get to do as a law professor. Is I get to spend so much time just researching all and studying all these great innovators, and Charles Goodyear and Cyrus McCormick and Elias Howe invents the lock stitch for the sewing machine, and Isaac Singer, of course, of Singer Sewing Machine Company, same types of innovations. And in fact, I'm known as the sewing machine guy in kind of the academic patent law world because I wrote a very famous article about the invention and patenting of the sewing machine called The Rise and Fall of the First American Patent Thicket, the Sewing Machine War of the 1850s, because it led to a patent war in the 1850s as well.
Right. I may have even researched some of that before I knew you because I'm always fascinated by the sewing machine. I know how to sew clothes, and it's amazing to me that the machine works the way that it does.
It's the same technology that was invented by Elias Howe and Isaac Singer and Batchelder and all these other individuals in the 1840s and 50s. The sewing machine was the smartphone of the 19th century. I mean, it took about 100 years. People were trying to invent it for about 100 years, from the mid 17th century to the 18th century to the mid 19th century, and in the sense of the same, just like with the smartphone, there were a lot of different people who invented different components of what becomes the successful practical sewing machine. And then they all started suing each other for infringing their patents, and they resolved their dispute through what we call patent pool, which was an invention to solve the problem of the sewing machine war. It was invented by the patent owners. They all got together and said, we can license with each other instead of suing each other. And pool our patents together into a single corporation or an entity or trust, as it was called at the time. And we then can get all down to the business of manufacturing. Elias Howe didn't want to manufacture. He just wanted the license because he just said, I don't mind this, but you have to promise that you're going to license the technology to other manufacturers so I can continue to receive royalties, my payments for the use of my patented technology on the lock stitch. And this is what leads to this massive explosion in productivity with sewing.
Right.
We drop in the price of clothing and shoes. In fact, the Singer Sewing Machine Company becomes the first multinational corporation in America. By the 1860s and 70s, it's selling more sewing machines in Europe than it is in the United States.
It's amazing. We need that kind of solution to the problems with the patents right now, rather than what we are seeing from the American Invents Act and the problems with injunctive relief.
Exactly. The American Invents Act and these bad decisions from the U.S. Supreme Court, and even regulatory actions by the antitrust officials, they're all a byproduct of this. For lack of a better term, a moral panic that has been created in Washington, D.C. about the patent system. If you Google the broken patent system or patent troll, you'll
Right.
get millions of hits. And because this is part of a narrative that was created by big tech that wanted to weaken the patents, that wanted so that they could have easy access to other people's technologies, and it's really unfortunate because the patent system is not a problem. It's a key to our success as a society, historically and today, and that's what I just love to try to talk about and explain. And these stories about McCormick and Singer and others are key to people understanding that patents facilitate innovation. They facilitate commercial development of products and services. They're not blockades. They're not problems. They are not taxes on
Right.
innovators. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Well, I think we've covered everything that I wanted to ask you about. Is there anything else that you wanted to hit on while we talked today, or anything you thought you just might want to say?
Yeah, there is one
Okay.
thing, and I'm really glad that you asked this. So at the end of your awesome documentary,
Yes.
the Innovation Race, you have some great clips of the Perseverance rover and the Ingenuity drone that's been flying on Mars now for about over a year now, I think.
Right.
And for a tech geek such as myself and a science geek, I mean, that drone, that little drone that's flying on Mars, is such an exemplar of everything that is awesome about the United States and our support and promotion of innovation. So first of all, it's only 118 years from the first powered flight by the Wright brothers in 1904 at Kitty Hawk, which lasted for about 35 seconds, to us flying a drone on Mars, which is, I think, about 35 million miles away. Wow. And that drone is an incredible feat of technology because the atmosphere in Mars is far thinner than ours, and so its rotors have to operate at a speed that that on Earth would be destroyed. The machine would destroy itself. So it's a technological accomplishment in of itself. But
Right.
to make it even more kind of really cool, there's a piece of the Wright brother flyer attached to that drone. They got permission from the Smithsonian to cut a small swatch
Wow.
from the Wright brothers flyer, the original plane that flew in 1904, and it's wrapped around one of the wires on the Ingenuity drone. And where it first flew on Mars, it's now called Wright Field.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. It makes me tear up. Because the Wright brothers just capture perfectly. And Orville and Wilbur Wright, right? They made bicycles
Right.
in Ohio. They weren't aviators. They weren't engineers. There wasn't even aeronautical engineering yet because people didn't fly yet.
Right.
And they worked on coming up with these incredible new innovations that made mechanical flight, heavier than air machines flying in the air that we now take for granted, we don't think twice about, possible, revolutionizing the world in ways that were just unforeseeable in
Right.
1904, and to think about how far we've come in just 118 years
Yes.
is just amazing. I mean, that's and that's the entire, to me that encapsulates perfectly the entire success of the patent system, but also just the American can-do spirit, the American ability, focus on, let's solve problems, we can do this, You let individuals be free. People, they didn't have to be bicycle, sellers and builders.
Right.
They chose to be, and then they chose to be, pioneers in aerospace. And that was facilitated by the freedom that they had in our country and by our patent system.
And that's why we have to protect it.
And that's why we have to protect it, because that technology was created over a decade ago. And so that technology was created at a time when innovators had reliable and effective patent rights. And that's exactly what we're going to start losing now in the next coming decades, because that's the impact, is that people aren't going to be investing in those types of things anymore in the United States.
No, or they're just going to lock it up and put it in a cabinet.
In a cabinet, and no one will know about it. And then there won't be drones and flying on Mars or people going to Mars. Yeah.
Which is that's not what we want. So that's why we're involved, and I really appreciate your time today. And for both of the films that we've done on this subject, I've learned so much from you over the past few years. And I just love the fact that you really are a professor and you're able to break down complex legal theories and explain it in a way that really resonates with people. So
thank you. I do love what I do. So it really, it means a lot when I hear people appreciate the work that I do, because that's why I do it.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for listening and watching our podcast today. And make sure that you check out Adam Mossoff's website at adammossoff.com and his social media feed, so you can get the This Day in Innovation updates that he does on a regular basis.
The Innovation Race podcast is hosted by Jenny Beth Martin and produced by Kevin Mooneyhan, Lori Heiselman, and Andy Peterson. Luke Livingston directs the video podcast. Innovation Race podcast is a production of Tea Party Patriots Action. For more information, visit teapartypatriots.org. That's teapartypatriots.org.